On a July morning in 2019, in a hearing room in Washington, a man from Toronto unpacked photographs of his family and stood them up on the witness table, facing Congress. His name was Paul Njorage, and he spoke slowly and precisely, the way a man speaks when precision is the last thing he has left. The photographs showed his wife, Caroline, his son Ryan, 6, his daughter Kelly, 4, and the baby Ruby, 9 months old. 4 months earlier, all of them, along with Caroline's mother Anne, had boarded a Boeing 737 MAX in Addis Ababa. 6 minutes after takeoff, the airplane flew itself into the ground. He told the lawmakers that he stays up nights imagining the horror of those 6 minutes. And he told them something the paper trail would spend the next 7 years proving. None of it had come out of nowhere. The airplane that killed his family had already crashed once, 5 months before, and the failure that brought it down had already been forecast by the government's own engineers in a memo with a number in it. This is the story of that number. The story starts 8 years earlier with a phone call Boeing never wanted. In the spring of 2011, American Airlines, Boeing's customer for decades, was preparing to order hundreds of jets from Airbus, whose A320 now carried dramatically more efficient engines. Boeing's clean sheet replacement for the 737 was the right airplane, 7 or 8 years away. The Airbus order would be signed in weeks. So Boeing shelved the future and chose the shortcut. Take the 737, an airframe drawn in the 1960s, riding low to the ground for the stair carts of another era, and hang new engines on it. The engines were the whole point, and they were enormous, too wide to fit where the old ones hung. Engineers pushed them upward and forward, out ahead of the wing. But the new geometry had a habit. At steep angles, the pods themselves made lift ahead of the airplane's balance point, nudging the nose higher, exactly when a pilot needs it down. An airplane that pitches itself toward a stall does not get certified, and Boeing had promised its airlines the MAX would fly like the old 737. A pilot rated on the old jet would walk onto the new one after a short course on a tablet. No simulator. Boeing's deal with Southwest put a price on it, $1 million per airplane, owed back if regulators required simulator time. So the fix for the nose-up habit had to be invisible, something no pilot would ever notice. Boeing wrote it in software and called it MCAS. Its job was to make the new plane feel exactly like the old one by quietly swiveling the horizontal tail and pushing the nose back down. On the drawing board, MCAS was modest, a small nudge, reserved for the far corners of the flight envelope. Flight testing changed that. By the time the MAX was certified, the software could move the tail 4 times further than the safety analysis on file, and it could trigger again and again, resetting each time the pilots pulled back. The FAA's paperwork was never updated, and the system took its cue from a single vane on the side of the fuselage, one angle of attack sensor, on an airplane that carried 2. Then Boeing made its most dangerous feature disappear. The company persuaded regulators to leave MCAS out of the pilot manuals. A system no pilot would ever see needed no training, and avoiding training was the point. Boeing's chief technical pilot for the MAX, Mark Faulkner, was meeting the software in private. His instant messages, later handed to Congress, sound like confessions typed in real time. MCAS, he told a colleague in 2016, was running rampant on him in the sim. "I basically lied to the regulators," he typed, unknowingly. And in the same pile of messages, one Boeing employee typed to another the sentence that would follow the company into every hearing room. This airplane is designed by clowns, who in turn are supervised by monkeys. The airplane in those messages was rolling out of the Renton, Washington factory at more than 40 a month. A senior manager on that floor, a retired Navy squadron commander named Ed Pearson, watched exhausted mechanics chasing part shortages through mandatory overtime, and in June of 2018, 4 months before the first crash, he asked Boeing in writing to shut the line down. "For the first time in my life," he wrote, "I'm sorry to say that I'm hesitant about putting my family on a Boeing airplane." He pushed the warning as far up the chain as it would go. The line did not stop. Lion Air Flight 610 took off from Jakarta at 20 past 6 in the morning. Before dawn, 189 people aboard. The evening before, over Bali, the very same airplane had nearly gone down on the same route, the captain's instruments at war with him, the nose lurching down without command. Saved because a third pilot, riding the cockpit jump seat by plain luck, recognized an old drill: runaway stabilizer, flip 2 switches, cut the tail loose. The mechanics signed off the complaint overnight, and in the morning the jet was loaded with passengers again. A repair shop in Florida had rebuilt the angle of attack vane feeding the captain's side, and it was wrong by 21 degrees from the moment the wheels left the runway. The flaps came up. MCAS woke, certain the airplane was stalling, and swiveled the tail. The captain pulled the nose back up. The software reset and pushed again. More than 20 times over 13 minutes, man and software traded the airplane back and forth until the software won. Flight 610 hit the Java Sea at more than 400 miles an hour. Boeing's answer was reassurance. The MAX, the company said, is as safe as any airplane that has ever flown, and its executives pointed, gently and persistently, somewhere else. A foreign airline, a maintenance log, the dead pilots. In a union hall in Texas a month later, American Airlines pilots sat a Boeing vice president down, and the tape of that meeting preserves their astonishment at hearing the name MCAS for the first time. Boeing told the room a software update was coming in 6 weeks or so. 4 months later, it still had not arrived. That same winter, inside the FAA's Seattle office, the government quietly did the arithmetic on the airplane it had certified, typed into an internal memo in December of 2018. If MCAS was not fixed, the design flaw would go on killing. Roughly 15 more fatal crashes over the life of the fleet, nearly 3,000 more deaths. The FAA looked at its own forecast and let the MAX keep flying while the software fix crawled through the paperwork. The memo stayed inside the building. Pilots and passengers never saw it. Congress would publish it a year later, when the counting was no longer hypothetical. In Toronto that winter, Paul Njorge and his wife were planning a trip. Caroline wanted the children to see Kenya, to meet their grandmother's country. Paul stayed behind to work. He would follow soon after. They booked the way every family books, by schedule and by price, and the itinerary ended with the short morning hop from Addis Ababa to Nairobi. Ethiopian Airlines, Flight 302. The airplane assigned to it was a 737 MAX, 4 months old. Sunday morning, March 10th, 2019. Addis Ababa sits nearly 1.5 miles above the sea, and the highland air was thin and bright as Flight 302 rolled down the runway. Seconds after liftoff, the vane on the captain's side failed, sheared away, most likely by a bird, and began reporting an angle of 74.5 degrees, an attitude at which a 737 cannot be flying at all. The stick shaker began hammering. The speed readout split, and when the flaps came up, MCAS woke again. This crew knew what was hunting them. They did what Boeing's bulletin had told the world's pilots to do, after Lion Air. They cut the electric motors to the tail, exactly as instructed. The nose stayed heavy. The first officer took hold of the manual trim wheel, the mechanical backup, and could not move it. At the speeds the runaway had forced on them, the weight of the air pressing on the tail had jammed the wheel solid. Boeing's procedure had not mentioned that, so with the ground rising to meet them, they switched the motors back on and reached for the electric trim. MCAS fired one more time. 6 minutes after takeoff, Flight 302 went into a farm field southeast of the city at nearly 600 miles an hour, carving a crater where 157 people from 35 countries ended. Caroline, Anne, Ryan, Kelly, Ruby. China grounded the MAX the next morning, the first country to act. Regulator after regulator followed, while the United States, the airplane's birthplace and certifier, held out. For 3 days, the FAA insisted the MAX was airworthy, until satellite tracking showed Flight 302 tracing the same doomed profile as Lion Air. 346 people were dead, and the flying world ran out of ways to call it coincidence. The MAX sat grounded for 20 months. In Washington, the families filled the hearing rooms, holding photographs the size of protest signs, and Boeing's chief executive, Dennis Muhlenberg, testified in front of them on the anniversary to the day of Lion Air 610. Then the messages came out, the clowns, the monkeys, the lie to the regulators. The House investigation named the disease in 3 words, a culture of concealment, and the Justice Department charged the Boeing company itself with conspiracy. The airplane had been certified on the strength of a deception. Muhlenberg was pushed out, floating down on more than $60 million in stock and pension. What the case produced across 7 years is quickly told: no conviction. In 2021, Boeing signed a deferred prosecution deal, $2.5 billion, the bulk of it owed to its airline customers. The only human being ever charged was Mark Faulkner. A Texas jury took an afternoon to acquit him. Then, in January 2024, a door-sized panel blew out of a MAX 9 over Oregon, and for a moment the case breathed again. It ended in May of 2025 with a softer deal still. No guilty plea, no outside monitor. The federal judge who reviewed it wrote that the families were correct. The agreement fails to secure the necessary accountability to ensure the safety of the flying public. He dismissed the case anyway. The law gave him no way to say no. 7 weeks ago, a federal appeals court turned the families away for the final time. The deadliest corporate crime in American history, the family's phrase, uncontradicted, is closed. The MAX flies today, rebuilt the way it should have been built. MCAS listening to both sensors, firing once, and simulator training required after all, the thing the $1 million rebates were built to prevent. By every public measure, it is now safe. Thousands of them cross the sky every day. Paul Njoroge settled with Boeing last summer on the eve of what would have been the first jury trial. Boeing itself has never faced a jury. What remains is the paper, the confession in the chat logs, the warning from the factory floor, the forecast with 15 crashes in it, filed 3 months before the second one. Nothing that killed those 346 people was ever a secret. The disaster was never hidden. It was filed. The last appeal was denied in May of 2026. But the post-mortem writes itself. The only question is whether anyone reads it before the next one.